Welcome to the California garden in the month of June. In today's episode, we look at all the harvests we made this month. We take a tour of the California garden. We have some interesting things for you to do. We review a cool gardening product. All this and a lot more in today's episode of California Gardening. So let's begin with all the harvests we made this month, beginning with the hummingbird tree leaves harvest. Now we had our hummingbird tree growing in our greenhouse. It's a tropical plant. You can grow it outdoors in Southern California, and it's known with a lot of different names as you see here. And these are the leaves. This is how the leaves look like. And we started harvesting the leaves. Now this plant, the hummingbird tree, produces leaves as well as flowers that are edible. And these are packed with nutrients, they're extremely healthy for you, and they're also very delicious. Now I know this is not a very popular plant, and it's also a very tropical plant, so it's not that easy to grow. So you can either remove the individual leaves, or as I'm doing here, just trim the branches while you're harvesting. And then you can just remove the individual leaves, and you can get a very good harvest from just one plant. Now the hummingbird plant actually grows into a tree. It's a large tree. However, if you restrict the growth, you can keep harvesting the leaves for quite some time. And this is how our harvest looks like. As you can see, beautiful looking hummingbird tree leaves. Amaranth greens. We were growing amaranth in our raised bed, and you can see it's a beautiful plant. And once it starts producing these beautiful flowers, you can start harvesting the leaves. Now if you want the actual amaranth grains, you can wait for the flowers to mature and then collect the seeds. However, I'm growing amaranth for its greens, and I don't really want the seeds to form, because once the seeds fall, I'll have amaranth growing all over my garden. So you can see here lots of leaves. I'm harvesting all the tender leaves. Once again, amaranth greens are a very good addition to your diet. These are extremely healthy leaves, as you can see here. The harvest looks beautiful. Apples. You'll be surprised that apples grow very well in Southern California. We have a lot of varieties of apple growing on our apple trees, as you can see here. This is the N Shimmer apple. And you can see how easily the fruit comes off once it's ready for harvest. And we have several more growing on this tree, which is a 4-in-1 tree. And we harvested a few more, and we still have a few apples left on our apple tree. So all in all, a great season to grow apples here in Southern California. Beans. We were growing pole beans along our trellis between the raised beds, and this is the Kentucky Wonder pole beans, one of the most prolific varieties of pole beans that you can grow. It's also resistant to a lot of diseases. And the beans grew abundantly. We first started harvesting the Kentucky Wonder pole beans to start with, which was occupying almost half of the trellis that you see here. And just look at these beans, they are quite nice. I always like growing beans at home just because they are so crunchy, nice and delicious. Now pole beans grow best in the spring and the summer weather. And this is the second variety of pole beans that we're growing. This is an heirloom variety. I don't really know the name, but you can look at a harvest here. Beautiful looking pole beans. Now we were back to harvest more beans. You can see that our plant is totally loaded with beans now. Bean plants grow very well in the summer season as well. You can see this is the heirloom variety of the pole beans. They are a lot longer, as you can see here, a lot longer than the regular pole beans. And they are also very delicious. Now once again, I don't know the name of this variety, but someone gave me the seeds for this pole beans, and I've been growing these pole beans for a long time. If you know the variety of this pole bean, please post it in the comments below. I would be happy to know it. And this bean has a lighter color. It's not as dark green as the Kentucky Wonder pole beans that you see here. But overall, both these bean varieties made up a lot of the beans that we harvested from our plants. And just look at the harvest. This is the heirloom variety of the pole beans. Beautiful looking beans. And these are the Kentucky Wonder pole beans, the dark green ones. And just in a few days, you can see that the pole beans have grown back. And we had to really keep up harvesting these beans because there were just so many beans on the plant that we had to come every few days and harvest these beans. The vines kept getting longer and they kept producing these beans as you see here. And once again, you can look at a harvest here. Beautiful looking beans, and we got an abundance of beans from our garden this month. Moving on to bottle gourd. Now the bottle gourd is a very interesting vegetable. It's very nutritious. It is also very delicious. And we were growing one variety of bottle gourd here in this plant, the round bottle gourd. And as you can see, the harvest looks beautiful. Cabbage. Now while not a warm season crop, the cabbages can still grow in the Southern California weather. And you can see here we are growing 3 cabbages in this one whiskey barrel container. This is the early Wakefield Jersey variety. And you can see we got 3 cabbage heads. Once again, the cabbage heads won't form that well in the summer season, but this is still a decent harvest of cabbages. And we had more cabbages growing on the raised bed. As you can see here, this cabbage has matured now. It's ready for harvest. And this is quite a large cabbage that was growing in the raised bed. And the cabbages that are grown in the summer season might be a little firmer than usual, a little more fibrous, but they're still very delicious to eat. You can look at how beautiful this cabbage is. Cauliflower. We also had cauliflowers growing in our raised bed. Once again, these were all extra plants that we had, and we had to plant it in the raised bed, although it was the summer season. But they still grew well. You can see the cauliflower head, it looks nice. Here's the harvest. And we had several more growing in containers as well. You can see one more here. growing in a small 5-gallon container. The head is not large, but it's still a decent sized cauliflower. Cucumbers. We had several varieties of cucumbers growing. This is the Beet Alpha cucumber variety that was growing in the raised bed. And as you can see here, beautiful looking cucumbers, very smooth skin. Unlike the Japanese cucumbers, which have a lot of thorns and not so smooth skin, the Beet Alpha cucumber is a better cucumber variety because it's also very delicious. You can look at our first harvest here, beautiful looking cucumbers. And we were back in just a few days to harvest more cucumbers. This is a very productive cucumber plant. And it did develop some kind of a mildew after a few days, but it still produced a lot of cucumbers. Now I try to keep the mildew off by spraying a little bit of neem oil. You can look at how beautiful these cucumbers are. Very nicely sized cucumbers as well. They're not as large as the Armenian cucumbers, but they're not also very small. So just the perfect size for a very delicious snack. And cucumbers are very healthy for you. They are mostly water and nutrients and vitamins. So eating cucumbers is a great addition to your diet. And just look at how beautiful the harvest is. Beautiful looking cucumbers. And we were still getting more from this plant. And towards the end of June, you can see that the cucumbers are nice, but the plant has a lot of problem with the mildew. You can see some yellowing leaves as well. But look at the harvest here, quite gorgeous looking cucumbers. Eggplants. We had several eggplant varieties growing. This is the Indian variety of the eggplant. You can harvest them when they are medium sized like these. You can also harvest them when they are smaller. Now when you harvest them when they are smaller like these, they taste very unique. You can actually slice them, you can put some spices and you can stir fry them or you can grill them. They're all very delicious. So you can harvest them while they are this small or you can wait for it to get larger. They still taste almost the same. Eggplants are also called brinjal or aubergine in different parts of the world. But all in all, it's a delicious vegetable. And here are some more Indian eggplants that are growing in the raised bed. And this is how our harvest looks like. And here are some more. And summers are the best time to grow eggplants. They grow very well during the summer season. And we had another variety of eggplant that we were growing in the raised bed right next to these. And I'll shortly get to the harvest of that one. But just look at the harvest of the Indian eggplants here. These are pretty amazing eggplants. Now there was one more variety of eggplant here. This is a bright purple eggplant. As you can see here, this is also an Indian variety, but just a different one. This is the medium Indian eggplant variety. And you can see the eggplant looks a lot different. It's rounder in shape and also has a bright purple skin. And is also very delicious to eat. Hyacinth beans. Our hyacinth bean plant had become so large that it was over like 12 feet tall and it was producing a lot of hyacinth beans, as you can see here. Now hyacinth beans are also very delicious, very nutritious. However, you have to cook the hyacinth beans to get rid of some substances in the hyacinth beans when they are raw. Just like you would soak kidney beans very well before consuming them, you need to cook them very well as well. So just like that, hyacinth beans have to be cooked very well before eating. You cannot eat them raw. But just look at how many hyacinth beans we have on this plant. It is a very heavy producer. We just had loads and loads of hyacinth beans. And hyacinth beans are perennial plants. They will keep producing year after year. This is actually the second year. And you can look at a massive harvest here. And then moving on to ivy gourd. We had our ivy gourd plants everywhere in the ground, in the containers. This particular one is in the ground. And as you can see, we are harvesting a lot of ivy gourds from just a very small plant. And we also have multiple varieties of ivy gourd growing. This is the long green Indian variety. And there's also a medium variety, the medium green. And they both have a very unique taste. Can't say that one is better than the other. They're both very unique and very nice. And the ivy gourds do ripen very soon, so you need to make sure that you are watching the ivy gourds and harvesting them every few days at least. And you can see such a small plant here, but it's produced a lot of ivy gourds. And ivy gourd is known by a lot of different names around the world. And it's a very delicious vegetable. Once again, when you're eating vegetables, you need to add a variety of vegetables to your diet. Since we get most of our nutrition from vegetables, we make sure that we grow a variety of vegetables and we eat a variety of vegetables to stay healthy. Okra. We had our Nombo giant okra plants growing in a container. And you can see the okras are quite large. And they started producing like crazy once the weather warmed up in June. The okra plants will be very productive once the weather is warm to hot. And you can see that the okras will produce almost every day. So you need to be careful in watching the size of your okras. The Nombo giant does produce very large okras, but this can also get very fibrous if you don't harvest them in time. So just keep an eye on your okra plants. Make sure that you're watching the growth of the okra and harvesting them in time. And here is one more plant. This is also growing in the whiskey barrel. And I love growing the Nombo giant variety of okra because it's very productive. And you can look at the harvest here. Beautiful looking okras. Onions. We were growing onions both in raised beds as well as in containers. This particular one is a harvest from the containers. And you can see they are beautiful looking onions. These were grown from sets. And I'm not a big fan of growing onions from sets anymore. I just had a bag of onion sets with me, so I grew them. And the problem with growing from sets is that the onions develop a thicker neck compared to the onions grown from seed. Now, I don't know why that happens, but I just think that growing onions from seeds is a lot better than growing onions from sets. And you can see that the bulbs are large enough, but they're not as large as the onions that I had grown from seed last year. If you remember our onion harvest from last year, the ones that we grew from seeds, the bulbs were a lot larger than growing from sets. But all in all, for a small whiskey barrel container, growing a lot of onions very easily, I can't really complain because this is still a lot of onions that we can eat. And we also had onions growing in our raised bed. And as you can see, we started harvesting a few. And the reason we started harvesting these onions over time is that we need to cure them. They will take quite a long time to cure. So by harvesting some of these onions in advance, we give it a chance to cure properly before we can use them. And you can see that these onion bulbs are quite large. The ones growing in the raised beds were slightly larger compared to the ones growing in the pot. You can see here this is quite a large onion as well. But the neck, as you can see here, is quite thick. And this goes back to the fact that these were grown from sets. And that's not a very good idea. Now we are drying our onions in an onion drying rack, which we built ourselves. You can see that it just has some slots to put the onions and it does a great job of drying the onions. Peppers. If you remember our last month video, we had shown you that the pepper plants were a little stunted, but they all were producing peppers. So we went ahead and harvested all these peppers so that the plants could grow a little larger. And you can see this is the crispy pepper variety. It's a very delicious pepper variety. And this is how our harvest looks like. We have more peppers on the way to be harvested soon. Snake gourds. We had all our snake gourd plants growing in containers this year. And as you can see, the snake gourds have started producing. And eating snake gourds is a very acquired taste. I would suggest trying the vegetable first before you start growing it. But for those of you who have eaten snake gourds, this is an amazing vegetable. It makes some delicious curries. You can chop them up, you can shallow fry them with coconut and spices, and it tastes really nice. And we had one more variety of snake gourd on the other container, and this is the dark green variety. Once again, very beautiful looking snake gourd, and all varieties of snake gourds are pretty good. And look at our harvest here. These look like snakes, but they are gourds, hence called snake gourds. Strawberries. We had all our strawberries growing in our GreenStalk leaf planter, and as you can see here, the strawberries are very clean when we are harvesting them. That's one of the benefits of growing them in a vertical planter, is that you can easily harvest them when they are ripe. They don't touch the soil, so a lot of insects can't get to it. And these are really nice and juicy strawberries grown at home, much better than the store-bought ones. Now I used to just come out every few days, harvest these strawberries and put them in my oatmeal, my morning breakfast. And it was a really good fruit that I added to my breakfast bowls. And all in all, we got a lot of strawberries from our GreenStalk leaf planter. Tomatoes. We had our single stem tomatoes growing in our raised bed, and it was time to start harvesting these tomatoes. And that's exactly what we did. We are now harvesting some of these tomatoes. As you can see here, growing single stem tomatoes has been a very successful venture for me this year. I think last year I was growing tomatoes on multiple stems and they didn't produce as much as the single stem tomatoes this year. So I'm going to be continuing to grow tomatoes on single stems. As you see here, it is a lot of work just pruning them and supporting them on the stem. But I think the results are worth it. I did get a lot of tomatoes from almost all my tomato plants this year. And that was because they were growing on a single stem. Here are some more really huge beefsteak style tomatoes. And once again grown on single stems. You can see that they're very nice. The harvest looks beautiful. And we were back harvesting some more tomato varieties. This is the Roma tomato. It's a very small tomato plant, a determinate tomato plant, but still produces a lot of tomatoes, as you can see here. And just look at how beautiful these Roma tomatoes look. And this is another harvest just after a few days. And we also had tomatoes growing in the ground. This is an heirloom tomato variety that we are growing for a long time. And I call it rasam tomato because it's used in a dish called rasam, which is basically a tomato soup made from tomatoes. And it is a very delicious dish. You should try making rasam at home if you get a chance. As you can see, beautiful looking tomatoes from this container as well. This is an Indian heirloom tomato variety that we are harvesting. And even in a small container, this tomato plant produced a lot of tomatoes. And you can look at a tomato harvest here, beautiful looking heirloom tomatoes and very delicious as well. And we also had tomatoes growing in the raised bed. These are a tomato variety called Delicious, which is a beefsteak style tomato. It produces huge tomatoes and we harvested some really big tomatoes from these tomato plants on the raised bed. And these tomatoes only produce if you grow them on a single stem. I've grown this tomato unsuccessfully last year, but look at our harvest here. These are beautiful looking tomatoes. And now let's take a tour of the garden, beginning with the raised beds. In our first raised bed, we still have our onions. They will be harvested this month. The bulbs have grown larger and they're ready for harvest. Some of them did start bolting, so it's time. We also have the bush bean plants which have now grown larger. And the okras, they've grown quite significantly bigger than last month. We have our asparagus beans and our pole beans on our trellis. And you saw all the harvests, and there are still a lot more beans on the plant that are yet to be harvested. So you can see how prolific these bean plants are. And moving along the trellis, you can see that the cucumbers are next. This is the Armenian cucumber. Huge cucumber here that's ready for harvest, and this plant is growing really well. Right next to that, we have our eggplants. These are our Indian eggplants. As you can see, eggplants of all sizes on this plant. Lots of eggplants. Even after everything that we harvested, there are still a lot of eggplants here. And right next to that, we have our pepper plants. Now, some of these peppers have not recovered very well, but the other pepper plant is producing quite a lot. And we have some more eggplants. This is our eggplants bed, eggplants and pepper bed. So a lot of eggplants here. We also harvested the medium Indian purple eggplant that you see here. And all of these plants are growing really well in the summer season. Moving on to the next raised bed, we have our burgundy okra. That's growing quite well. I think it's producing the pods now. As you can see here, one pod. And this plant really took off in June after it was planted. We have some more okras that we sowed a little late, so these will take a little more time to come up. But hopefully this month would be the time when these plants grow really big. We have our beets. The beets are not doing that well because it's so hot. And then our overwintered cayenne pepper has some pest issues, as you can see. And we have these eggplants. This is the Aswad eggplant. It's a huge eggplant, and I'm really looking forward to harvesting some of these. And in between the two raised beds, we have our ridge gourd plant. Now you can see the ridge gourd has grown quite well between the trellis. You can see a huge ridge gourd here that we were late in harvesting, which we'll keep for seed now. And moving on to the next raised bed, we have cucumbers. A lot of cucumbers here, different varieties of cucumbers. All growing really well. And you can see that for the trellis, I have actually used tomato cages, but instead of using one tomato cage, what I have done is I've zip tied 6 tomato cages together, and this forms a really sturdy trellis. So if you're looking for a very cheap option for trellis for cucumbers, this is a great option. We have started a new batch of tomatoes, single stem tomatoes again. Now all these plants were volunteer plants from the compost bin, so I'm hoping they'll produce some good tomatoes. We have our peppers here, poblano peppers, as you can see, producing really well, and some bell peppers as well, and some banana peppers overwintered from last year. The cilantro has bolted due to the heat. And in the last raised bed, we have our amaranth greens, which have grown back now after the harvest. We have our cucumbers, the beet alpha cucumber that's growing okay now, has some issue with mildew as I mentioned. And right next to that, our corn plants have taken off. They are growing quite well in June. And next to that, we have our single stem tomatoes. Once again, we harvested a lot of tomatoes, but we still have plenty more on the plants that are yet to be harvested. So this season has been really good for tomatoes so far, which is why I started a new batch of tomatoes so that we can get harvest late in the season as well. And you can see multiple tomato varieties here around this raised bed. Some really large tomatoes as well. And on the back, we have our ivy gourd plants that have really taken off in June as well. You can see it's grown quite a lot and will start producing ivy gourds soon. And you can see one ivy gourd already here, but this plant will be full of ivy gourds very, very soon. And that completes the tour of our raised bed garden. Let's now move on to the containers. On the first side of containers, we have our galangal plant, followed by the Thai chili plant. Now this is a long Thai chili variety that I grow almost every year. Produces long chilies that are very spicy. Followed by some bush bean plants. We have our overwintered eggplant. This is the black moon eggplant, and you can see one branch has dried quite a lot, but this plant is still producing a lot of eggplants. So I'm going to keep trimming the plant to make sure that it survives well. We have our single stem tomato plant. This is the heirloom Indian tomato variety that's growing quite well. Followed by mint. Now this mint plant is in full sun, not doing that well. It still has a lot of leaves though. We have our Santaka chili plant, which is now producing flowers. Hopefully it will produce chilies soon. Followed by a holy basil plant. This holy basil plant is a new variety we are growing for the first time this year. Turmeric also growing very well. This is the season for turmeric plants to grow and thrive. And our purple potatoes also looking good. Now one thing that you might have noticed is all these containers now have the GreenStalk spinner on the base, and this is something I will discuss in detail later on in the video, but look how nice these containers look now. In our GreenStalk classic planter, we still have our onions growing, the bulbs are becoming larger, and as soon as we harvest the onions from the raised beds, these would be the next to harvest. In our GreenStalk leaf planter, we have a lot of strawberries growing, mostly strawberries and cilantro. You can see so many strawberries now. Even after the harvest, they are all growing quite well. And the GreenStalk leaf planter has been really good for us for growing strawberries this season. And the plants are looking really nice now. And you can compare both these planters side by side. The one on the left is the GreenStalk leaf planter, and the one on the right is the GreenStalk classic planter. Moving on to our containers on the other side, we have the Aswad eggplant, 2 more growing in this container, looking quite good. Followed by our snake gourd plant. The snake gourds are growing quite well now. You can see multiple snake gourd varieties here. And snake gourd also loves the summer season, just like other gourds like this bitter melon plant that we have here, or the bitter gourd. It's producing quite a lot of bitter gourds now and has grown quite large in this container. We have our carrots. We sowed some carrot seeds here. Once again, not a good crop to grow in the summer, but I did have some seeds that I put in here. These are the bush hyacinth beans. These plants are growing quite well. And I've kept these to go to seed so that I can harvest them later. And this is our chili plant, the bird's eye chili variety, growing quite well here in this container. And it has a ton of flowers. Followed by the Nombo giant okra that we harvested a lot of okras from in the earlier section of the video. You can see a lot more okras growing now. Followed by a couple of single stem tomatoes, the Indian heirloom variety. So we are getting a lot of tomatoes this season, as you can see here. Followed by turmeric, 1 more turmeric plant in this container. Followed by our mint plant. Now this mint plant is in the shade, so you can see how nicely the leaves have grown. Very nice, very delicious leaves with quite a lot more water content. The next one is an ivy gourd plant. This is producing a lot of ivy gourds that we will harvest very soon. You can see very large ivy gourds. They're looking quite good and are ready for harvest. And this plant is loaded with ivy gourds, as you can see. The next one here is a pepper plant, 2 pepper plants actually. It's called the Better Bell pepper plant, and we are growing 2 of these in 1 whiskey barrel container. The next plant is a tomato variety called Ace. Once again, we are growing this as a single stem tomato. This is one of the tomato varieties I've grown in the past. Followed by our taro root plant, which has become quite large now. We will be harvesting this in fall. In the next container, we have more snake gourds. As you can see, the snake gourds are growing quite well here. Lots of large snake gourds on this plant. And we have 2 more tomato plants. This is a delicious tomato variety. Once again, single stem tomatoes. 2 of these in 1 whiskey barrel container. And in the next container, we have our Egyptian walking onions. I'm very excited to grow these for the first time this year. They haven't started producing yet though. We have hyacinth beans. This is a different hyacinth bean variety in the next container. And it has grown so tall that it has reached the top of the trellis and is now falling downwards. You can see okra, the Nombo giant okra, in the next container. It is also growing some more okras, as you can see. In the next container, we have our jumbo orange tree, but also the cantaloupe plant that you see here. It's produced 2 cantaloupes, and I'm really excited to harvest it very soon. The plant is now quite dry, so I think this is all that it will produce before I'll remove it. And in the first container, we have our gooseberry plant, which has now grown quite tall compared to the past couple of months. On the next side, we have our bottle gourd plant, the round bottle gourd that we harvested. We have 2 more bottle gourds growing now. And this plant is looking good. It is a large plant, it does need a large trellis. In the next container, we have the early long eggplant. And this plant is loaded with eggplants, as you can see. Quite a lot of eggplants that we have to start harvesting. Beautiful looking eggplants that we will be harvesting very soon now. And we have our ivy gourd plant in the next container. Looking good with quite a lot of ivy gourds, as you can see. And this is yet another different variety of ivy gourd that's growing quite well in this container. And we have another hyacinth bean variety in the next container that's producing a lot of hyacinth beans now, as you can see. And once again, this has grown to the full length of the trellis. And this is almost a 10-foot trellis, so that's quite a large trellis right here. And we have our longevity spinach in the last container that's also growing quite well. And that concludes the tour of our container garden. And now let's look at some things for you to do in your garden. I have discussed about Vitality before, and these are basically very high quality worm castings, and I've been using it in my garden. Now if you get your own bottle of Vitality, make sure that you shake it very well. There's a lot of worm castings that are at the bottom, so make sure that you shake your bottle really well before you start using it. And Vitality has been a very good addition to my gardening regime. I mix in 4 ounces of Vitality into a 2-gallon watering can, and then I water my plants. And this provides very high quality worm castings tea to my plants. Now you can see here I used this on my okra plant, and the okra plants have really taken off once I started using Vitality on these plants. And the reason is the soil contains a lot of compost, a lot of worm castings that I added. And the Vitality, which is basically a worm castings tea, helps the plant uptake all the nutrients from the soil. So in the summertime, there are a lot of nutrients in the soil. The point of adding Vitality is to help the plant uptake those nutrients. And I did finish 1 small bottle very quickly. So I recommend getting the gallon sized container of Vitality if possible. And here I'm using it on my eggplants. And vitality is also excellent when the plant is in a flowering stage or a fruiting stage. It does help unlock all those nutrients in the soil that your plant can take up. What that means is you will have less nutritional deficiencies in your plant. And I've also been using vitality in my container plants with very good results. And I use it every 15 to 20 days and it has great results for my garden. And I'm also going to show you how to use worm castings. This is by VermisTerra. This is something I highly recommend using as a part of your gardening routine, is high quality worm castings. And the good news is that you can now get free shipping on your order in addition to a 10% off on your entire order when you use coupon code CAG. And what we're really doing is planting this pepper plant in the soil. But before that, we are adding a couple of scoops of these worm castings. And now we are planting the plant. And as you can see here, the soil becomes a lot more nutrient rich, and it will also help the pepper plant absorb a lot of nutrients from the soil once we add these worm castings. Now you can also add worm castings to established plants like this tomato plant that we have. All you do is just spread it around the base of the plant and lightly mix it into the soil. And once that mixed in, you can just water your plants and you're good to go. And now moving on to the gardening product section, where we will look at the GreenStalk spinner. Now, as I mentioned, I had a new container area where I had a huge problem, and I'll show you what the problem is. The problem was that there was a lot of water collecting in these saucers at the bottom of the container. And the reason for this water collecting is that some containers like this one do not have plants that absorb a lot of water, whereas some other containers like these absorb all the water and there's nothing left. So I was running into a problem where I had to change the frequency of the watering. You can look at how much water has collected here at the bottom. And this gives rise to anaerobic bacteria, which is very bad for your plants. The moisture starts seeping into the bottom of the plant and the roots are not habitable anymore. And to address this problem, we got the GreenStalk spinner. Now the GreenStalk spinner has a very unique design. It has holes that will collect the water, all the water that's coming down. And it also spins, so you can actually spin your pot around. These are the drainage hole pipes, which will basically redirect the water to a different location. And each one of these spinners comes with the drain pipe, which goes right here. So basically all the holes capture all the water, they collect all the water, and then the drain pipe lets it go into a planter area or a turf area very safely, as you see here. So this is the basic premise on how the GreenStalk spinner works, and we're going to show you how to change your existing saucers to GreenStalk spinners. And once again, these pots are on a paved surface, so you don't want water draining right onto the pavers. It's going to stain the pavers. But collecting water like this and draining it out is a very good solution. And let's show you one more container here. What we basically do is move the container out, place the GreenStalk spinner like you see here, and then adjust the drain pipe so that it drains at the bottom into a planter area or any other area which is non-paved. And then we replace the pot and we replace the drip irrigation line. And look at how much water has collected here. You can see these bean plants are not that big and they can't take in a lot of water, and it's completely waterlogged at the bottom. And after adding the GreenStalk spinner, all the excess water will drain and it will fall off onto the turf area that you see here. So it does take a little bit of time, but these plants will be a lot healthier with all the water at the bottom drained out. And you can look at the water here. So much of water collected at the bottom, which is not good for your plants at all. A lot of dirt as well, as you can see here. And just look at how it's changed completely now with the GreenStalk spinner. So this is one product that I highly recommend. It's a very good investment for your gardening needs. It's extremely sturdy. It can take in large size containers, and it's an excellent solution for your container garden. You can look at all the containers here now with the GreenStalk spinner. And although I have the drip irrigation line on now, These GreenStalk spinners will ensure that there's no excess water at the bottom. All the water will drain safely onto the planter area or a non-paved area very easily. So all in all, a great solution for your container gardening and something that I highly recommend. You can look at how the excess water is draining out here. And to buy these GreenStalk spinners, you can use coupon code CAG to get 10 off 75 when you place your order. And this is a very good product, something that I have been using for almost all containers in my garden now. So there we have it, folks. It takes a lot of time to make such videos, so I'd really appreciate if you could hit that like button. And if you're not already a subscriber, hit that subscribe button as well. And if you have any questions, comments or suggestions, please post them in the comments box below. We'll see you again soon. Happy gardening.